Hey, y'all, I'm Daniel. I am an addict and an alcoholic.
Hey, Daniel.
Um, Thank you, Tim, for your kind words. But these guys don't get much of that while they're here. But I'll say this, Tim plays a very special part in my life, not necessarily in my recovery directly, but he has made me a much more valuable employee. He was my boss for a long time, and watching him and how he handled and managed and dealt with situations demonstrated what I want to do in those situations. And it's cool because I've gotten to grow up throughout this process, and people like Tim, and then there's a handful of other people in this room that like played a very significant role for me. So for Tim to say that there's some old school faces to show back up that I played a part in is like a small debt that I could possibly have for those people because someone did it for me. I'm not special on any level. Though I will appreciate, I'm very honored all y'all came out to see me tonight. Self-centeredness is that I still struggle with it, and the reality is I'm like, wonder how many people are gonna come see me. And then when I'm like, oh, there's not as many people in the parking lot, I'm like, it's because the Texas Alabama game. Which a part of me was like, I'm not going to do the speaking engagement, even though I committed to it because there's a big football game. So I still struggle with selfishness and self-centeredness, but today I can laugh about it and it doesn't debilitate me. I don't feel judged by y'all. And that was not the case for the person standing up here. Growing up and in my addiction is all I was worried about was trying to impress the people in my life that I viewed as having significance or sway, and I tried my best to do that, and I was a disappointment left and right. I heard a lot growing up that I had a lot of potential. I don't hear today that I have a lot of potential. And it's because I do things. I actually show up. And so if anyone is telling me I have potential, it is an insult. It is because I don't show up. And I did not understand that. I thought people told me that you have potential and you're special and you're good at this and you're good at that. I thought they were complimenting me. And they really probably were. But my self-centered perspective views that if you give me the validation to say I have potential, that's good enough. Like I shouldn't have to actually take energy or effort or sacrifice. If you tell me that, we're good. And that's like as far as it went for most of my life. So I have a couple of big life things happening in the next couple of weeks. I'm going to be moving to another state, and I'm born and raised in this city. And it's given me kind of a different perspective over the last month of really trying to appreciate some of the smaller things that beforehand I took for granted. One of those being the drive out to BRC. Those of y'all that know, it is a far drive from Austin. It's not close. It's great for residents when they don't want to leave, or when they're trying to leave treatment and they're like, wait, how far is Austin? But it's not great for in terms of working out here every day. But there's a part of it that when I was driving out here today, I really did appreciate. And I'm glad that I can acknowledge the sadness I feel about leaving Austin. I'm glad that I can acknowledge the gratitude I have for Austin, because as like a male, when I'm leaving the city I grew up in, a part of me feels like I need to be stoic. I need to have a game plan. I need to be like very logical when people ask me what's my plan. People are like, oh, what are you gonna do for work? It's like, I don't know. Oh, are you excited? I'm kind of sad. Like it's like all the opposite responses as you would typically think, or as I would think that I should be presenting to people. And I would say that like a big part of the reason that I can do that today with confidence and with security is because of the 12-step process, because people kind of demonstrated that to me. And I was someone that was not trying to get sober, like on any level. I did not want any part of sobriety, because the only thing I found in life that was worthwhile was drugs. It was drinking. It was the only thing that made anything worthwhile. I remember one of the questions they asked me when I signed up for IOP, and I didn't stay sober, but when I signed up for IOP, they asked me, they said, what are your hobbies? And I was like, I have a lot of hobbies. I'm a very interesting guy, and I'm very fun. Oh, what are some of them? I like making playlists, is one of them. Oh, when was the last time you made I'm aging myself here a bit, but I used to burn CDs a lot. So they said, when's the last CD you made? I don't know. What else do you like to do? I like to go swimming. When's the last time you went swimming? What else do you like? I like to play basketball. When's the last time you played competitive basketball? I mean, I had these stories in my head that were made up. I didn't do any of that. I had done that at some point in my life, but I didn't do any of that. And that's what recovery showed me, is how delusional I was with the reality of my life, where I come into a room. Some of y'all are here to see loved ones. Like, y'all got serious stuff going on. You're not here to see me. Some of you came to see me. I appreciate that. Some of you are forced to be here. You're in treatment. I appreciate you too. But like, the self-centeredness still alive in me and well today is like, everyone's here to see me. And it's laughable if I'm clear on it. And the only way I can get clear is to have people in my life tell me, does that make any sense? Is that working for you? Do you want to check that again? And I had built up so much defensiveness throughout my life to protect my addiction that I could not have someone threaten me. I could not have someone challenge me. So I'm very grateful to be here. I used to sit in the back of this room in 2012 and 2013 for this meeting, Saturday night speakers. I was in the Austin recovery community, and everyone would talk about go out to BRC on the second Saturday of each month. They always have banger speakers. And I would sit in the back room or back of the room back there, and I would always want to speak from up here. I would always want to speak from up here. And I was 23 years old. Like, I was 23 years old, and I was excited about going to a speaker meeting on a Saturday night in the middle of nowhere. Like, that is the evidence of a psychic change starting to occur, because there were so many people in this room that had something I wanted. They were captivating. They were magnetic. They possessed something that was like really, really impressive, confidence. And I remember sitting back there, and all the time I'd always be like, I want to be able to speak up there. I want to be able to speak up there. And like, now I get to. Like, it's really, really cool getting to actually watch some of the stuff that beforehand was just a kind of a flimsy read on what life could look like, and now it is an actuality of life. I just got back from California. I spoke out in a conference out there for AA, and it was amazing. I really would have never guessed that someone who is resistant to the process of recovery could be being asked to want to be heard or be listened to. So I'm very grateful for y'all, for whoever asked me in BRC for hosting this. It's really cool getting to be a part of it. And I do appreciate the people in this room that played a role in my life for sure, because there's a few of y'all, so thank y'all. So I was born and raised in Austin. I was raised with my mom and my sister. Growing up, I told people at school and friends that I didn't have a dad. That wasn't true. But I told people, yeah, my mom raises me and I have a sister. Oh, is your dad in the picture? No. My dad was not in the picture as I saw fit at the time. But as a result of writing inventory and going through the process of recovery, I learned that he actually wasn't an absent father. And I was a very angry kid. I didn't know how to have any conversation without yelling, screaming, throwing something. I was a very angry kid early on. And that was an easy outlet to blame, was his absence. And he was a guy that when you would try to yell and scream at him to try to get that validation of at least you feel something. He grew up in New Jersey, very stoic, didn't show any emotion. I felt like he never told me he loved me, that kind of thing. So I never could get a response out of him. I couldn't get a yell, couldn't get a tear. So for me, it was like my mom and my sister, they're everything I got. And I was a horrible brother to my sister. So I really just had my mom. And as we fast forward in the story, it shows kind of the reality of my addiction is the only person that was important to me became the most expendable person in my life for sure. So I was going through that process of trying to figure out how to deal with my mom, my sister growing up as a young kid, and they would try to pull me from school. I don't know if it was because I had anger problems. I don't actually know why they wanted to pull me out of class to put me in like a counseling group where they'd take us to reward time or give us snacks or something. They let you skip school to go have fun. And they walk into the room and they'd be like, Daniel Hart. And I'll be like, I'm not going. And this is like 8 years old. Like, I'm not going, I don't want any part of that. Like, I just wanted to be a normal person. I just wanted to be with the crowd. I didn't want to be special. I didn't want to be different. I just wanted to be okay. And I remember thinking of that later on because I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 14, and the exact same thing. Like, I would not talk about it. I would not show people. I wouldn't do I was very secretive about it because I wanted just to be like everyone else. And like, that's like a disease that your pancreas doesn't work. So you have to do a lot of things like every day to make sure you're functioning correctly. And I ignored all of it. I just acted like I didn't have it. And eventually that kind of caught up to me. But I would say that my confidence as a kid was really good in terms of I thought I was smarter than people, but I was afraid that I was going to be exposed. I felt like people were going to actually see who I was. And when they saw who I was, they would realize how scared I really was. And they would realize how weak I really was. And then they wouldn't like me, or then they wouldn't be telling me I have potential. So I remember exuding confidence, whether it was playing sports or in the classroom, but I don't remember actually feeling, it was a hollow confidence. And the first time I smoked weed was with a Coke can under a playscape. And I don't actually know if I got high because like I didn't know what I was doing. So I'm lighting this thing up, we're doing it, and we're all giggling and stuff. And I remember I had a little bit left in my pocket and stuck it in there. And we're walking out of the park down the street, and I just remember being like, I'm the most tight person. I'm the most badass person there is. Like, I just smoked weed under a playground. No one can touch me. Like, this is amazing. This thing is awesome. This little baggie is some swag. They don't have swag anymore, I heard it's like all, like I don't know what dabs are. I know that's a big thing. I got sober June 27th, 2012. And that's not actually my sobriety date. That's just the date I picked because of DJ Screw. But no, the reason I picked that date though is because I was snorting phenobarbital while I was in treatment. I didn't want to get sober, but as a result of like doing the work, something changed. And by the time I actually left there, I had a psychic change. Something had shifted in me. And so when I talked to my sponsor, because I had a sponsor, I got honest. I said, hey man, I might need to change my sober date. He said, why, what's up? And I was like, well, I was snorting phenobarbital for the first like 20 days I was in there. And he said, yeah, you might want to change your sober date. I was like, well, what date do I pick? He's like, I don't know, find one. So I looked at the little calendar. I was like, all right, June 27th. So yeah, I really do feel for people that are in addiction right now, because back when I was getting high, I didn't have to worry about dying. Like, I was an IV heroin addict, so you did have to worry about like overdosing, but not because someone gave you something bad. I do feel for y'all that are in active addiction at this point, because it's very scary. Because like I knew what I was buying every time I bought it. And that's a whole nother world of like why this thing is so deadly, is because I don't know what's actually in what I'm buying, which is extremely unfortunate. But so I started smoking weed, started drinking. My mom had hosted parties, so there's a lot of wine and beer in the fridge in the garage. She didn't ever keep track of it, so I'd drink all that. I started hey mistering people. Y'all know what hey mistering is? All right, so I was too young to buy alcohol, so I'd find people who were of age, and I would, hey mister, man, I'll give you $20 if you buy me this. Or hey mister, I'll give you $40 if you buy me this. So I would get liquor that way. I would get older brother or my friends' older brothers to buy us liquor. Eventually I found a way to get a fake ID. So that was a very legit process to being able to get my own booze without having to hey mister or spend. This is the thing, when you hey mister someone, it's a good deal for the person buying the alcohol, because I get like an $8 tiny little thing of liquor and they get the extra $12. Like, a part of me wishes that I could be on the receiving end of the hey mister or something. Like, I want $12 extra. But so we would do that process and figure out ways to get wasted and stuff like that. And I got arrested and I got put on probation, but at the time it wasn't like a red flag. School was, I mean, there was no like severe problems in my life, except for the fact that I had to go pee for the state of Texas and give them money each month. But for me, there was no problems in my life. And people, this is like when people started getting a little sensitive to the fact that like maybe there's other stuff going on. Because I could show up well to a family gathering when I was in high school. I could show up well to school. So I was convincing myself that nothing was really wrong. And there were kids that I hung out with. I refer to people as kids a lot. They're not literally kids, but as I keep moving along, I'll say the word kids, and I apologize for that because most of them are grown adults, but they're kids in my mind. We're all kids. So I was getting those consequences with the legal, but I didn't think it was a problem. So kind of fast forward a little bit, and when I was in, I think it was like I was in inpatient treatment, and I was telling someone that I had smoked opium when I was in high school. And the guy looked at me and he said, "How old do you think you were?" And I was like, "Probably 16." And he said, "Dude, a 16-year-old isn't getting opium. You were smoking heroin." And so I realized that I tried every drug I ever did by the time I graduated high school. I went to the school in Austin that was based off the movies Dazed and Confused. So, I mean, drugs were prevalent. You could buy anything you wanted at the lunchroom. And it wasn't a big deal. So it was not like there was a lot of negative stigma attached to it. It was like, if you can pull it off and not get in trouble, you're good to go. And that was kind of the way I thought it was going to go throughout life. And I had planned for it to go that way. So get into college, I go to St. Edward's in Austin. And this is when the opiates like the Oxycontin and the Opana stuff was going on. And so like I got fully addicted to those, was paying $100 a pill. And this is like when money started to become a problem. This is when the physical withdrawals really started to happen. And so I did a pretty good job of trying to manage those external consequences for a long time. I would befriend the drug dealer. I remember going over there many times when I would owe him money, and he'd say, "Are you good?" And I'd say, "Yeah, man, I'm good." And I'd come over there with a bag of coins. Like, I told you I got the money, dude. He's like, "Don't ever bring me a bag of coins again." Or I went over there one time with an iPad, and then he said, "What do you want me to do with that?" I was like, "Dude, you can pawn it." And he said, "No, you can pawn it." So, I mean, it started to get to the point where I had no money. So I started having to figure out the ways to be able to get high and stay well. And that's the truth, is I was just trying to get well. I wasn't actually getting high at this point. I had moved from Oxycontin and Opana to heroin. And I remember being very resistant when I got exposed to the 12 steps, saying, "No one needs to teach me. I know how to be honest. I know how to be willing." They said, "Man, you've been being taught your whole life." I said, "What do you mean?" And they said, "Who taught you how to sell swag? Who taught you the difference between swag and good weed? Who taught you the difference between hydrocodone, Roxy, and Oxy? Who taught you the difference between, or who taught you how to get a fake ID? Who taught you how much you sell this for, how much you can get this for? Who taught you how to stick something in your arm?" You know what I mean? Like, someone taught me all the ways I learned to be able to live and hustle and survive. But I then get to a place of sobriety and recovery, and it's something I've never done. And for some reason, my mind says, "I don't need help with that. I'll be good to go. I know how to be honest," except I haven't practiced honesty on any level in my life for 10 years. So I started having health issues due to diabetes, primarily. Like, they start threatening to, like, "We're gonna have to cut off limbs, you're gonna lose your eyesight." And at the time, I remember thinking, like, man, I'm not going to live that long anyways. Like, it doesn't matter. It does not matter. And my mom is devastated. I mean, she was crying all the time in regards to like the health scares going on. And she didn't even know about the substance abuse to the extent that it was as the catalyst for this. But she just thought my diabetes was out of whack and that I was going to lose my eyesight. So she started getting more involved in my life. Big surprise, I didn't like that. I don't like when people get involved in my life. Like, no, let me control it. So she's getting more involved in my life. She starts asking me about, like, "Hey, why are you making so many 1-minute phone calls each month?" Like, that kind of stuff. Like, because people are wanting to come over. Why do you think? You make 500 1-minute phone calls a month. She starts asking me about, like, "Well, where'd that money really go?" No, it went on, it was for that date. Oh yeah, it was for that tire. I need that new tire. no, I need those school books, Mom. I need those school books. Like she starts kind of asking questions she shouldn't be asking. So like I'm starting to realize like I gotta be a little bit smarter. I gotta start figuring out what's going on, or I gotta figure out a way to be able to manipulate this situation. Because keep in mind, she was like my everything to me. Like she was my one person, my rock. When they were asking me to write inventory on the people in my life I was resentful at, she was the one person I wouldn't put on my list. I'm not resentful at her. She never left me. She never betrayed me. And the truth is I probably had the most resentment towards her. I just couldn't acknowledge it. And I'm glad that someone kind of held my hand and forced me to do that process, because I realized how much stuff I had pushed down and blamed on my dad, or blamed on this person, or blamed on this girlfriend, or whatever. And so I started kind of really trying to get through that process of the 4-step, looking at it with her. I feel like there was a part of me that when I was starting to hit the places of consequences with my diabetes, starting to hit the consequences of no money, starting to hit the consequences of the school. I mean, my grades were awful. Work was a front just so they wouldn't ask questions. I feel like what started to happen is a part of me started to just say like, it's going to burn down and I just need to get through it. If I can just get through it burning down, I'll be all right. And I can keep doing what I'm supposed to do. And it just slowly started to get worse and worse and worse in regards to like, I mean, crawling around the carpet, not being able to control bodily functions, like not being able to show up. Like I remember one of the saddest memories I have in regards to one of the people in my life at the time, which was an ex-girlfriend. And she was like very supportive. I don't know why she was with me. That reminds me. So when I had like 6 months sober, I was like hitting on all the very attractive girls at the meetings, because I'm a very attractive guy. And I remember like they were turning me down. And I remember talking to, it might have been my sponsor, it might have been Lane, I don't know who it was. There's someone, and I was like, man, what the heck, man? They're like keep turning me down, and like look at me. Like he's like, what do you have to offer? And I thought about it, like I had like no money. I was in sober living. I didn't have any like actual skills. Like then I really thought, I was like, dang, that's a good point. So like if a girl's into me at 6 months sober, like that might not be a very good like statement towards, I mean, I don't know. So I was gonna turn down a lot. But anyways, the girl that I was in love with in my addiction, she would always tell me like I was addicted to Vyvanse, you'll be able to get off. I was addicted to Coke, you'll be able to get off. Like she obviously was a hard user at one point. I didn't know what that meant at the time, but as a result of the big book, like you start learning about the hard user and the real one. And she would always encourage, like, you'll get off. And I couldn't get off. I mean, it was horrific for her. I tried to make amends to her, and she has yet to speak with me. She has yet to see me. I haven't seen her in 11 years. And I owe that girl my entire life, because she's the reason my parents got fully involved, because I was trying to hide it from them. But she's the one that was like, listen, Daniel's having seizures every day. He can't stop getting high, this, that, and the other. So she's the one that kind of ripped the blanket off. And I've never thanked her. And I really hope that one day I can personally, but my hope is that by trying to help out the next person, that in some way or fashion, like the universe kind of shows that in some way. So, but I remember like being dope sick for a couple days, like sweating in the bed, shaking, not being able to eat, all that stuff. And I'm trying to like drink past the detox. Like I'm just gonna chug as much liquor as possible. I'm just gonna pop Xanax. I'm just gonna try to get through this as best I can so I can show up well. And this is like the end of a 2-year dope sick. Like I was not high for about 2 years. I was like sick for 2 years, and occasionally I would get well, but I didn't have enough money to get high. And that's why one of the things I think in hindsight with me getting sober and actually feeling good, it like caught my attention so quickly, because I hadn't actually gotten really high in a long time. I'd gotten drugs, but just I had too much tolerance in my system to be able to give me the full effect produced. So I had been sick for a couple days, and I remember I'm in the bed, and I remember my phone goes off. And what do you think's on my phone? It says, we're good. So I kind of get out of bed, walk into the living room. She's on the couch, of course, because she can't sleep with me in the bed because I'm shaking and sweating and all that stuff that goes along with that. So she looks up and she says, where are you going? And I say, I'll be back. And I walk out the door. And that was a lot of what, like, for some reason, that memory just brings like such horrible gut levels of like the powerlessness piece of this deal is like, I wanted to get through the detox. I was already 2 days in. I wanted to show up for that girl. I loved her more than anything from the capacity that I was capable of at that time. I wanted to not go out that door. But the minute I got that text, guess what happened to me physiologically? I changed. I was able to walk. I wasn't throwing up. Like all of a sudden, my body literally changed because of a single text message. Like that's how much control it has over me, is that just driving there, I already feel better. It's not even in my system yet, and I can already feel it. By the time it hits my hand, I'm better than okay at that point. So it's like, that's when I didn't recognize all this at the time. Like I recognized this stuff later on, is how debilitated I had actually gotten to this thing, how powerless I had actually gotten to this thing. So we end up having an intervention, all that stuff happens. I get put on Suboxone because Suboxone is going to solve my problem. And this is one of the self-centered things about it. When I got put on Suboxone, my mind said, my family doesn't want me to get high. What do you think my mom's reason for putting me on Suboxone was? So I didn't die. You know what I mean? Like that's the delusion I possess, is that I'm like, you're trying to buzzkill me. And she's like, I'm trying to have you not die. Like I do not see the world for as it really is. I do not see the reality of the people in my life. I do not have real connections. I have people I use. And if you don't serve me in the way I need to, then the relationship changes. And that changed with my mom when at the end of our relationship, like she's not giving me money anymore. She knows what's going on. And so I make up a story. I tell her I need $1,200 because the dope man's going to rob your boyfriend's HVAC warehouse. And I give the key to him as collateral unless you give me $1,200. So it goes from like, hey, can I take this girl on a date, to all of a sudden blackmailing her into giving me cash so I can go get high. Truth is, I did have a debt, but beside the point is and the key's in my pocket the whole time. Like it's not even with the drug dealer. I just knew I needed the money. So I'm starting to be willing to compromise on anything that I actually have in terms of integrity or character or confidence or whatever. So I'm asked to try to figure out where I want to go. So they start entertaining different places. I go to IOP. It's great. I don't stay sober. I started going, but the one thing in hindsight, I realized all the different things I tried set me up to being able to be successful. So I went to that IOP and I didn't actually stay sober at that point, but that IOP got me connected with a guy who knew stuff about meetings. So I started going to meetings, and I remember I didn't have a car, of course. I didn't have anything. I didn't have any money. I lived in my mom's spare bedroom. And then when I would mess up there because I'd steal her alcohol or steal her pills or do whatever, she'd move me over to my dad's house. And I'd stay over there for like a couple weeks. Then he'd move me back to my mom's house because I'd do the same thing over there. Like it was a mess. But I'm getting driven to meetings by my mom, my dad, my aunt. And they drive me up to the parking lot. They give me $1. I go into the meeting. They come out. They pick me up and say, how was the meeting? Sucked. And then we go home. That was like every day. It was awful. But this is an interesting. So when I was at one of those meetings, I'd gone long enough because this was like a few months. I'm doing this thing for a few months. I meet a guy that I had gone to school with, and we run into each other, and he's like, yo, you go to meetings now? And I was like, dude, I don't want to. And he's like, well, he's like, me neither, dude. He's like, are you doing it for court? And I was like, no, I'm in an IOP, and my mom does this. He's like, oh, bet. He's like, what do you want? I'm like, Suboxone. He's like, oh, just start doing this with it. And so he tells me a cool way to use it. But one thing I asked him is I say, what is a sponsor? And I don't know why I asked him this, because when you're in meetings long enough, you start picking up on some of the lingo. And I was like, what's a sponsor? He's like, oh, you're looking for a sponsor? Here, ask this dude. And he grabs a dude that I didn't know. He says, hey, man, this guy's looking for a sponsor. And I'm like, hey, what's up? Like, I'm not sober. I'm like, hey, what's up? And the dude says, hey, can we meet tomorrow to go over the big book? And I was like, I don't have a car. And he's like, well, how'd you get here? And I was like, my aunt drove me. That dude walked down to the parking lot with me, introduced himself to my aunt, said, hey, I'm going to be Daniel's sponsor. Can you drop him off at Starbucks tomorrow at noon or whatever? Like, that's a bold move. That's a bold move. I would never do that. But like, I'm extremely grateful he did, because when we started, like, I just want y'all to think about, like, this dude had like a year sober. He probably just got out of sober living. How often am I trying to sacrifice my time? If the guy walks up to me and is like, hey, I don't know who the sponsor is, I'm not asking him how did he get to the meeting and go into his car. Like, I'm that selfish. I'm like, no, dude, you got to show up for me. You better have all the work done. You better have, like, I have all these expectations and standards. Like, that's the self-centeredness that still is alive and well in my life. I expose that to y'all, so hopefully it changes. Like, that's not acceptable. The dude that carried the message to me did not do that. He took the extra minute to go figure out a way for me and him to meet. And when we met, he said, you cannot be on Suboxone when we go through this work. And I was like, okay. So I went home and I said, Mom, I'm getting off Suboxone. And she said, hell no, you're not. She said, if you get off, you cannot stay in my house. I said, fine, I'm going to leave then. I couch surfed for about 3 days, 3 or 4 days. I remember on my birthday downtown, I had no money, of course. So people are buying me drinks and stuff. And I remember I had thrown up all over myself, big surprise. I'd thrown up all over myself, and it's like 1:30 a.m. So I remember standing outside the bar because they had kicked me out. I'm like just chain smoking cigarettes, throw up all over me. And it's like my birthday. And I remember thinking, like, I need to get fucking high. Like, or sorry, I shouldn't have said that first. I need to get high. Like, I remember standing there up against the wall, just like, I need to get high. Like, and it's like, I had become this decrepit, like, skeletor of a person of like, all I could think about was getting high. All I could think about, I didn't even care that I was in public with throw up all over me. All I was just like, I need to get high. So I ended up going to long-term treatment. And I tried to leave like 20 days in, of course, because the phenobarbital ran out. And when I left, I remember saying to them, hey, I want to leave. And they did the protocol. Well, you got to do this and you got to do this. So I call my mom. I hang up on her, of course, because like I can't hear her cry. I can't hear her tell me she has a second mortgage out on the house for her to pay for me to go to treatment. That would hurt me. So I'm like, oh, I'm not calling my dad, hang up on him. Him and I don't have a relationship. He changed the locks on me, for goodness sakes. I don't know why. It's not because I was stealing his meds or anything. So I'm trying to leave treatment, and they kept me there like long enough for like a part of me was like, man, it's too late, because I was outside of Austin as well, as far away. So I was like, man, I'm not gonna be able to walk back to Austin before it's pitch black. I'll leave in the morning. And I didn't do anything special that night. But the next morning they asked me, are you gonna leave? And I said, no, I'm going to stay. And the obsession to leave treatment had been removed in spite of me, not because of me, in spite of me. I didn't do anything special. I didn't talk about my deep, dark secrets. I didn't do anything crazy that evening. I just didn't leave. And because of that, the miracle was able to occur, at least that I could sit in my own skin for a little bit. And from that point on, I started listening. I started paying attention. I started asking questions. And I was not bought into like this thing actually lasting, because I remember thinking like, well, I'm gonna smoke weed. Like, why would you not smoke weed? Like, that doesn't make any sense. I still kind of feel like that every normal person should smoke weed. I feel like a lot of the anxieties of the world will be solved, but for me, as a result of learning about the book, like I realized it's a risk reward thing. And if I am actually in a position of sanity, it is not sane to risk all my life for the reward of a little bit of weed. It's not worth it. I have a 5-year-old kid that I show up for. I have a career that I show up for. I have disc golf that I show up for. I have friends that I show up for. I have BRC I show up for. I mean, like, I have things I show up for. So like, is there a reward to maybe smoking weed or microdosing? Maybe. But like, what's the risk? The reward can't possibly be bigger than the risk. That's called sanity. And that's what's happened as a result of this work, is all of a sudden I see things for what they really are, instead of my little impulsive piece that's like, well, I deserve to. And it's like, maybe, but like, you also deserve not to be completely absent from your family's life to the point they have to put you on a medication so you don't die. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't hold things very fair. I really give myself a lot of the credit And I really kind of catered to giving myself the exception to the rule, except I looked at everyone else to be following the rule. So I go through that process, I get out, and I'm in the city I grew up in. I'm in the city I got high in, and there was a fork in the road every single day. I could go south on 183, or I could take South Mopac. I grew up in South Austin. So I could go south to 183 to go to a clubhouse that most people that are in the recovery scene know about, and it was my home for a long time. And every day I would drive at this fork, and I would say, should I go to hang out with the kids I grew up with, or should I go to this meeting? Every day I would ask that question. And it wasn't a struggle to answer it, but it was a realization that every day I have this literal fork in the road of what I'm going to do. And I appreciated being able to make that choice of going to the meeting. There was a part of it that became very, very fun. There's something that they read in one of the fellowships that's called Reaching Out. And it says, reaching out, I made it into this program because someone else worked their 12 step on me. Someone was out there after they got clean and sober, caring about others. And I had never actually cared about anyone through my actions. And that was really demoralizing to learn. They asked me, who do you love most in this world? And I said, my mom and my girlfriend. They said, how do you show up to your girlfriend? Strung out, degrading, like fighting, stealing from her, dope sick all the time, or super high where I just pass out. And I mean, like, I wasn't there for her on any level. Unfaithful. How do you show up for your mom? I don't show up. Or I'm like, hey, let's do dinner. And then you're like, you show up for that first 5 minutes, you're like, whoa, this is gonna go a little bit longer than I thought. So hey, I gotta go. So like, I was good at that one. I'm like, hey, and my dope dealer lived like a few blocks away from my mom. So I would do the one where I'm like, hey mom, I'm gonna come down South Austin, I can stop by for dinner. And then I'd be like, I'm gonna make a stop real quick. And then I just never would show up. Like, it's like those kind of things, I just never really had the appreciation to understand like how taxing they are. And when you're on the receiving end of it, like, it's hard. So for any of the families in here, you have to have people in your life that can hold that space for you. Just like the people that are in treatment right now, you have to have people in your life to hold space for you. And I'm glad that people held that for me. So I get out, I start trying to sponsor people. I remember sitting at a Starbucks one time, it was like a Wednesday night, 7 o'clock, I'm waiting for a sponsee. And I remember he doesn't show. I'm like, man, oh man. And so I call my sponsor, because that's what a good sponsor does. He calls a sponsor when he's upset. Says, hey man, I need a 10-step. And my sponsor said, where are you at right now? I said, Starbucks. He said, what time is it? And I said, I don't know, it's 7:15, dude. This guy was supposed to be here at 6:45. Can't believe this. And he said, where were you 6 months ago on a Wednesday at 7:15? And I was like, touche. But like, that's the thing. Like, I was nowhere near anywhere. Like, I always thought that because I was a drug addict, that I was being punished for being a drug addict, that my life had been kind of robbed from me or ripped away from me. But the truth is that all the opportunities that I wanted were outside the door. And I had one of those old apartments as I was over off Riverside and Congress. I'll never forget it. The ceiling was like 8 feet. It was tiny ceiling. Like, I could touch it just like bent arm like this. And it had a bathroom where the shower was like this low. So it was probably made, I'm building like the 80s or 70s. It was tiny. And I was like doing this thing. And I spent so much time in that little cupboard of a bathroom. So much time. Whether it was throwing up, whether it was trying to control my bowel movements, whether it was trying to find a vein, whether it was trying to not look in the mirror, whether it was trying to muster up enough energy to brush my teeth. Like, I couldn't do any of that stuff. And I remember thinking like, man, God's punishing me, robbing me of like the girlfriends I could have and the family I could have and the career I could have and the potential that I could demonstrate. And what I realized is I just never left the front door. The steps give me the ability to walk out the door. All the opportunities are there. No, the universe hasn't punished me on any level. I just never showed up to the opportunities. And the steps allow me to show up to the opportunities, such as tonight. And the funny thing is when I show up to opportunities, I always think that there's an agenda that I have or an expectation of why that opportunity presented itself. I'm like, oh, I'm getting to speak to BRC to maybe help someone in this room that maybe, I have an idea of what I'm doing here. But what happens in the universe is you get shown things a day from now, a week from now, a year from now, that you would have never guessed of why I'm actually here. Like there's a dude in this room that he saw me start taking recovery seriously, and I'd show up to the rooms and I would share at the meetings, and I'd be a part of group conscience. And he came up to me one day and he said, hey man, are you going to be a part of CA? And I said, yeah, man. He said, then you need to go through the traditions with me because you don't know what you're talking about. But like at the time, he probably thought, man, I'm helping this dude out so he can represent CA. What he didn't know is that I teach the exact same thing to people today to help them do that. Like he helped me, one person, and now I've helped 50 people that are then hopefully, like I have no idea the ripple effect of me showing up for things. And it doesn't have to just be recovery. It doesn't have to just be recovery. Like my physical showing up is most of what is required of me in my recovery. The problem with that is I can't show up. I sit in a bathroom. Like I find excuses. I compromise constantly. I claim principles, but it's like I work principles with y'all. Like I don't work principles when it comes to like the mother of my child. You know what I mean? She tells me something I don't want to hear. It's like, oh, hell no. Hell no. I don't do it with my mom when she's trying to like help me. Like, hey, you need to look at this. No. You don't tell me what to do. I'm a grown adult, mom. So like I'm great at practicing principles when it's like convenient. And that is not practicing principles, spoiler alert. Like I have to gain access into an ability to show up to those things. And I cannot do that on my own, just like I could not stop putting stuff in my body on my own. I wanted to for my girlfriend. I wanted to for my health. I wanted to for my mom. I wanted to for money. I wanted to because I wanted to live life. And I never was able to stop. I could not stop drinking. I could not stop getting high. And because of that, my life has changed completely. I don't even believe in the per se or the typical God. Like, this is my idea on it. I'm open-minded to a power bigger than me, because essentially what that means is I'm not God. That's really easy for me to admit, right? I mean, I think it's pretty bold of any of us in here to say that we are God. So, I mean, we can all get down with that, whether you're down for the idea of a higher power or not. If I am not the higher power, then essentially I'm open-minded to something else being it. That is all it has to be. And as a result of that, my life changes completely. That was all I was willing to give. I wasn't willing to buy a spiritual faith approach to this process. They're like, God's going to solve your problems. I'm like, you are out of your mind. You are out of your mind. Like, I can't stop getting high. And you're telling me to pray about it? You're out of your mind. But this is what I didn't realize is I thought it was the certainty and a belief in a God bigger than me. It is not. It is the willingness to be open-minded to the idea of a higher power. And that is true on day one. And that is still true for me today in year 11. Like it's never been that I have to have a definite, for sure, certain God. They asked me, do you believe in God? I said, no. And they said, can you control the weather? I said, no. They said, why don't you pray to the weather? I said, okay. I mean, it's a power bigger than all of us. I can tangibly feel it and see it. Like, I can't really argue that one. And I did. I did it like to be spiteful. I was like, I'll prove you this doesn't work. And I'm still here. He tricked me. So like I started learning these little lessons and such. And I'll say this is one of the things I realized in my recovery was practicing principles doesn't actually give me what I want. So I was in a relationship for many years and we have a kid together. So on paper, you would say, oh, you want that to work out for the convenience of the whole family dynamic and making sure that everyone's getting the best in that situation. Sure. But even if I'm showing up with principle to the relationship, it doesn't mean I'm going to have the relationship. Practicing principle in the relationship allows me to be okay with that, where I don't have to get high over that, where I can show up to my commitment still in spite of that, where her and I can have a cordial relationship and be a good co-parents for the kid that matters in that situation. Like I still have it twisted. I start thinking that spiritual disciplines are there to serve me. What I forget are that spiritual disciplines are designed to help me walk through the door so I can serve the universe, so I can be a part of the universe, so I can be present to the universe. And this is a constant ebb and flow where it talks about fear, and it talks about fears and evil and corroding thread. And I say, okay, fear's bad. But what it says is I have to outgrow fear. It doesn't say fear disappears. It says I outgrow it, which means I get bigger than it. But how the heck am I going to get bigger? All the things that allow me to enlarge my spiritual life, all the disciplines. There's a powerful story that I think hits home this really well. Is there's a mentor and a student, and the student says, I really want to achieve enlightenment. And the mentor kind of looks at him and says, okay, what do I have to do to achieve enlightenment? What do I have to do? And the mentor kind of just, I don't know. Teach me what I have to do. And the mentor says, there's nothing you can do as so much as to make the sun rise in the morning. The student says, well, what's the point of all the stuff you're having me do then? And the teacher says, to make sure you're awake when the sun rises. And I miss that every time. I think that I'm responsible for the sun rising. I miss that my job is to be awake to it. And that all the beauty that comes in this process is already there. It's already there. There's just as much beauty in this world as there is ugliness. There's just as much beauty in this world as there is ugliness. There's just as much beauty in the recovery process as there is people that are ugly in the recovery process. You're going to see what you want to see. I was shown that you pick your and create your own destiny. So I was not okay with accepting the below par bare minimum standard that I had lived my life by for 10 years. I'd already done it. It wasn't desirable. So when they asked me to write inventory, I didn't question it. I just did it. I made all my amends. It took me 7 years to pay off all my amends. Made all of them. And I'll end with this part of my story. So I make amends to my dad, and about 18 months later, I'm sitting on his couch in his living room. And at this point, we're developing a relationship. We're talking again. I realized he wasn't absent from my life, that I had pushed him away and kept him that way so I could blame the world for my problems and justify my bad behavior at his expense. So me and him are developing a relationship, and he walks up into the living room at 18 months sober, and he puts a key on the table and he walks off. And it was the key to his house. But remember, he doesn't do a good job of communicating kind of those emotional situations. So I look at the key and I'm like, oh man, this is awesome. So I go up to him like a week or so later and I say to him, hey, I really want to make amends to your mom, my granny. And she had passed away. So I talked to my sponsor about it, and he says, okay, Daniel, I really want you to pay attention to this amends. And I had made a bunch of amends up to this point. So I was kind of like, whoa, pay attention to this amends? It's at a gravesite? Like, what's going to happen? I'm self-centered. So me and him go out to Houston. I go make amends to my aunt who's still living. I make amends to her. Then we go to the store. We pick up some sentimental items. And we go out to the gravesite. Me and him both go out to the grave first, and we kind of are talking about some memories of her and laughing and that kind of stuff. And so he says, do you want your own space? I was like, yeah. So he walks back to the car, and I sit down on the gravesite, and I'm looking at the tombstone. I kind of close my eyes and start meditating, and I start making the amends. And I go through the format, I go through the process, and I'm doing it as sincerely as possible. And there's a couple questions at the end of the amends. There's the first question is, what did I miss? So I ask that question, and I'm meditating, I'm breathing, and I don't hear anything. Can I ask it again? I don't hear anything. So part of me is like, did I do the, okay, let me ask the next question. What can I do to make this right? I close my eyes and meditating. I probably sat there for 20 minutes. I mean, I don't know how long I was there, but I really was waiting because my sponsor said, pay attention. And I kind of get up and I'm looking at the tombstone. I'm like, okay, I made my amends. Nothing profound happened. And I walk back to the car and my dad was crying in the car when I got back in there. It was the first time I had seen my dad cry. And I realized how much of a toll I had put him through while I was being a disrespectful brat to his mom all those years, and how I thought this was about me getting to talk to ghosts and spirit world stuff because I'm self-centered and I want a cool story. But I forget that the amends is a ripple effect that affects everyone. And so I at that point I was like, I'm gonna make all of them, because I don't know who I actually owe amends to now. Like, I don't know how one amends can affect another person. And I try to remember that kind of idea is I don't want to leave a sponsee hanging when he may be the ripple effect for someone that might matter. Or I don't want to answer the, like, don't get me wrong, I don't want to answer the call every night. And sometimes I do skip it and call him back the next day. But I don't want to miss out on those ripple opportunities because they happen every day, every single day. There's some choice I get to make that has a ripple effect. The question is, am I making that choice? And no matter where you are, the family member, the loved one, the employee, like every one of us has that choice every day. So that's all I got. Thank y'all.